Welcome to Biology After Hours. We're going to get a little cozy and we're going to talk about my favorite subjects from endocrinology and reproductive biology that we weren't able to get to in lecture. We're going to try and keep it a little short, keep it a little fast, and keep it to things that are basically directly on your final. So it just so happens that's my favorite stuff. So without further ado, let us begin. Reproductive biology and endocrinology, aka mostly sex stuff, aka one of the few times where someone's going to draw a bunch of penises and then a surprisingly large number of people are going to say, better listen to what this guy has to say. So, what we're going to do, I'm going to be looking down occasionally because I have a tablet here, which is much better to draw on to keep things going fast. So if I'm staring down, it is not a reminder of reproductive anatomy, it's so I can draw. So why don't we start by hitting up some of the slides that I needed to look at. So what we're going to do is simply jump to, let's see, we talked about the hypothalamus, we talked about the hypothalamic pituitary axis. We did it real fast. Just so I can do it real fast, but also you can have it recorded. The hypothalamus is a portion of the brain just below the thalamus, and it contains neurons that secrete hormones. Those hormones travel through the blood to the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is a master gland for the human body. It essentially controls the pituitary, and that which controls the pituitary controls the body. So that's pretty much what the hypothalamus has going on. It is primarily responsible for secreting things called releasing hormones and inhibitory hormones. It has a few hormones that it secretes on its own. For instance, way back 1 million years ago in the urinary system, we learned about vasopressin, and vasopressin is one of the hypothalamic hormones. So, kind of cool. You can refer back to your notes there. So, what does the hypothalamus do to the pituitary? Well, when it needs the pituitary to release something, it secretes a releasing hormone. When it needs the pituitary to stop releasing something, it secretes an inhibitory hormone. So, releasing hormone, or RH, or inhibitory hormone, or IH. So, when you have different hormones that the pituitary releases, like gonadotropin, which is GN, and the hypothalamus would release GnRH. So, pretty simple stuff. Not too terrible. So, the pituitary is stimulated by releasing hormones and inhibitory hormones. It's responsible for getting growth hormones secreted, getting prolactin secreted, thyroid stimulating hormone, and adrenocorticotropic hormone. And then the ones that we're concerned with in our mostly sex stuff talk is follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So we did briefly talk about the growth hormone secreted by the pituitary. Its target is muscle, bone, and many tissues throughout the body. And the response is growth. If you don't have enough, you have pituitary dwarfism. Not the genetic achondroplasia dwarfism, but pituitary dwarfism. If you have too much, you get acromegaly, gigantism. So pituitary dwarfism, again, a deficiency in growth hormone. Your pituitary does not secrete enough. Your body is pretty much completely proportional, as opposed to characteristics of achondroplasic dwarfism. The big thing is that you're just kind of short and small. So the Wizards of Oz munchkins, as we can see in this image here, they were people with pituitary dwarfism. It's now completely treatable since we can synthetically crank out growth hormone. So you give someone who's not producing enough pituitary growth hormone during puberty some injections of growth hormone, catch them right up. Then there's acromegaly, in which you have accelerated growth. Your pituitary is overproducing growth hormone throughout your entire life. So essentially you get puberty levels of growth hormone from birth through death. So you have accelerated growth on past adulthood. Essentially, you grow and you start to look very old even when you're young, and past the point when your growth plates fuse, your bones continue to grow in thickness, and you get this thick features all over your body. So Andre the Giant, acromegaly, he was a rather famous guy, if you know The Princess Bride, which you all should. Gatekeeping. Anyway, yeah, this was Robert Wadlow, guy with acromegaly. He died pretty darn young, which rather sucks. So, TSH and thyroid, we did not have time to get to, so we skipped slides 14, 15, 16. We also skipped the adrenal glands. We didn't get time to do that, so that's 17. And now we're going to talk about follicle stimulating hormone. So people often think about follicle stimulating hormone as a female hormone. And indeed, it has some important roles in female reproductive biology. It targets the ovarian tissue. Specifically, it affects follicles. And we'll talk about those in a moment. So ovarian follicles. And the response is for those follicles and the egg within to mature. But follicle stimulating hormone may be named for the dramatic effect it has on follicles and the importance there in reproduction. However, it has equally important roles in the male reproductive system. So, it targets the testes, no surprise there. And the response is sperm maturation. So, in other words, you cannot get mature, functional, fertile sperm without follicle stimulating hormone. So, very important for there. Basically, follicle stimulating hormone is also required for fetal development. We go through, what it does in sexually mature individuals, but you get a lot of fetal development with FSH. So, very important. One of the big things FSH does in a female fetus is it kicks off egg production. So it kicks off follicle production while in the womb, which is pretty neat. We'll talk about that. All right, luteinizing hormone. In the female reproductive system, the target is the ovaries. And luteinizing hormone is responsible for actually triggering ovulation. So, FSH causes a follicle to mature over time. And as it matures, the egg becomes fertile. And then luteinizing hormone spikes and you ovulate. In the male biology, the target is testes, and the response to luteinizing hormone is synthesis of testosterone. It tends to be synergistic with follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone also helps stimulate the secretion of testosterone. So, a long time ago in homeostasis, we learned about insulin and glucagon. So you're going to want to check out slides 21 and 22. So basically, insulin gets secreted when glucose levels are too high, targets the liver and body tissues. Liver pulls out glucose from the blood and makes glycogen, and other cells pull glucose and make ATP, and this decreases blood glucose level. Blood glucose level gets too low, glucagon is secreted, and the target is primarily the liver, and the response is to take all that glucose we chained up as glycogen and break it down into glucose and secrete it into the blood, thereby getting glucose back up. So we'll skip diabetes, so skip 23, and then on to a little bit of ovaries, which we will go into more detail when we pop over to the reproductive system. So our ovaries, the general hour, I do not actually possess some. The ovaries are responsible for secreting estrogen and progesterone. Now, specifically the ovary here, right, it has these follicles that develop in them. And these follicles become mature, and then they release the egg, and then they sort of break down and blah. All right, now, during this maturation process, it's the follicles themselves that are secreting estrogen. And just after the follicle ruptures and the egg is released, we get this weird little structure here called a corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is what secretes progesterone. So it's not the ovaries, but the follicles within the ovaries that are actually secreting these hormones, right? So estrogen and progesterone have a wide variety of targets, not just the reproductive organs, but your skin, your muscle, your bones. Elevated estrogen causes multiple bodily anatomical changes during puberty. So that's why it targets so many things. So in males, estrogen and progesterone are made by the testes, very important as well. So the responses are the development of sex characteristics during biological female puberty and fetal development. So during fetal development, you produce the primary sexual characteristics, which would be the vulva, vaginal canal, uterus, ovaries. Those are the primary sexual characteristics. And then during puberty, you get the secondary biologically female reproductive characteristics. And the secondary characteristics would be things like breast tissue growth, and then other things like fat on the arms, fat on the hips, widening of the hips, that sort of thing. Inhibiting facial hair growth, like lots of stuff going on. Okay, so the other big thing is that they help grow and maintain the uterine lining. So estrogen is responsible for growing the uterine lining. Progesterone maintains that lining and what will eventually become the placenta if an egg implants in that lining. And then the placenta will take over progesterone production from that corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will break down and stop making progesterone, but if there's an implanted embryo that produces, and you get production of a placenta, then progesterone is made there. Progesterone has a variety of functions, including relaxing the uterus to allow fetal development. There's a whole lot of growth during pregnancy there. And then my favorite thing, other. So estrogen is primarily in the biological male, estrogen is a homeostasis of testosterone. It causes testosterone production to decrease. Progesterone in the male and the female causes estrogen production to decrease. In the female, this allows for maintaining the lining and development of a placenta and all that. In the male, this causes testosterone to spike back up. There's also a testosterone spike in females as well. So this is your basic little graph. So estrogen goes up and up and up as the egg matures, and then you hit this egg maturation point. You have a fertile egg ready to go, and you're going to get a spike of luteinizing hormone. Let me actually erase that and put it in a fun color. We'll do green. Green for go. So you'll get a luteinizing hormone spike. Whoa, come on now. And go back. You'll get this luteinizing hormone spike, and then you'll get ovulation. And you can see estrogen craters, and progesterone goes up because once the follicle releases the egg, it becomes a corpus luteum and starts making progesterone. So estrogen does not nearly reach the levels it gets when there's an immature follicle it's stimulating, as long as progesterone is around. So right around here is when our corpus luteum degrades. And then progesterone falls off if there's no placenta, and estrogen will start to rise again. The estrogen will rise again. That was terrible. Pretend I didn't do that. Testosterone and the testes. Okay, so the big thing in the testes, aside from estrogen and progesterone, is the production of testosterone. These crank out tons of it. In the female in the biologically female system, adrenals do double duty and make some testosterone because it is extremely, it's one of those hormones you can't live without. It is a hormone for lots for all people required for life. So in the male, you crank out a lot of testosterone, and the testes are responsible for synthesizing it. And again, gonad, skin, muscle, bones. The response, again, primary and secondary sexual characteristics. During fetal development, you get the primary sexual characteristics, the development of testes and penis and the prostate gland and various other features unique to the male system. Then during puberty, you get, so primary, penis, testes, other. The secondary, you get an enlarged penis. It grows quite a bit. It grows during puberty. You get greater muscle mass. You tend to develop facial hair. The larynx tends to enlarge. Various stuff that is associated with male puberty. It was once thought that there were sex drive. Sex drive has commonly been associated with testosterone, and people saying, oh, your sex drive falls off when your testosterone falls off. Now, there is a weak response to sex drive from testosterone alone. However, it's not the primary responsible hormone for your sex drive. There's basically no hormone that's a magic bullet responsible for the sex drive. If testosterone were responsible for the sex drive in males, then post-menopause in females, you would get a massive increase in sex drive because their testosterone goes up as opposed to before. So that does not necessarily happen. Thus, testosterone is weakly responsible for sex drive. Sex drive effects have to do with physiological weakness that occurs as you age. As you get older, you just sort of get weaker and you feel weaker and you mentally feel a little weaker and more fatigued. And that results in less of everything, including the sex drive. So a lot of boosting someone's testosterone having effects on sex drive is going to be the weak effect of testosterone and the placebo effect to a certain degree. Also, testosterone is going to have that systemic response on muscles and bones and everything like that. So you will get a less physiological weakness. But as far as sex drive effects go, so all those internet people saying, oh, you got low testosterone, you're less of a man, they can all shut up and go away. And that's pretty much it for the endocrine system that I want to go through. Okay, and we are back after that delightful cut talking about the reproductive system. So our reproductive system lecture is going to get us to the next bit. So the last of this. So we're going to speed through some of this. The male reproductive anatomy is pretty simple. It starts with the scrotum, an external sac of skin that is pleated to allow for expansion or contraction, and it contains the testes, and its big thing is temperature moderation. Testes must be kept below body temperature. So if testes remain above body temperature or at or above body temperature, fertility decreases. Functional motile sperm count goes down. So there are a set of muscles called the cremasters that are responsible for that movement of the testes up and down. They are also involved in ejaculation. So the testes themselves, we went over. They are, of course, the gonad. Their big thing, aside from endocrinology, is literally making sperm. How much sperm, you ask? Because I know you asked. About 300 million a day. Every day after puberty, falling off a little until you die. So tons of sperm. A lot of people with male reproductive biology remain fertile till they die. So, of course, testosterone, which we have already discussed. Our next thing on the tour of the male reproductive system is the epididymis. It is this comma-shaped structure here. And this is the structure sitting on the back of the testicles. If you happen to have a pair of testicles or one testicle, you can actually feel around in there and find the epididymis. Go for it. No one's going to judge you. So just sort of feel around and you will find some tissue sticking up on the back of your testes. It is roughly comma-shaped and it has a whole lot of tubular structures in it, because sperm goes from the testes to the epididymis in order to mature and be stored until ejaculation. So if you look again, these are the many, many tubes of the epididymis, right? And they all sort of connect up into one tube, which we will talk about shortly. And if you were to cut them open right here, you would find the maturing sperm. So this is a sperm. We'll talk about that for a second shortly. Okay, speaking of that long tube coming from the epididymis, it is called the Vas Deferens. This is a very, very long tube. It extends all the way from the epididymis at the bottom of the testicle, right here, up, right, up through the testicles into the body cavity, looping up over the pubic bone, right? Your pelvis is here, right? So if you look at your pelvis, hole, that sucker is going to come up and, well, okay, I'm going to just erase it, whatever. That is going to come up and over that pelvis and then dip into the body cavity, past the bladder, down. There's a gland here we'll mention, pass through the prostate, and then here is where it connects up with a common structure, the urethra. So, very long tube, connects to the epididymis, through the body cavity, through the prostate, connecting to the urethra. And the sole function, of the Vas Deferens is to provide a pathway for sperm during ejaculation. When one ejaculates, the sperm has to travel the entire length of the vas down the urethra and then through the entire urethra out to the urinary meatus and out of the penis. It has a Homerian epic. Each sperm its own hero of a great I don't know, man, that's going weird. So the urethra. It is a common structure of both the urinary system and the reproductive system. We've already mentioned it. It just goes from the prostate down through the penis to the opening of the penis, the urinary meatus. So that is the urethra. No big thing. The penis is kind of funky. It has specialized tissue. So the penis on its own is generally a flaccid, well, generally. The penis without stimulation is flaccid. So this means it is, for lack of a better word, floppy. It is filled with tissue called the corpus cavernosa. So the corpus cavernosa is pretty cool. It is this sort of tissue filled with open spaces, and during stimulation of many sorts, the corpus cavernosum can fill with blood and cause the penis to go from flaccid to erect. So an erect penis is essentially the structure it requires for copulation, which is penetration during sexual reproduction, or mock sexual reproduction, should you not want to go through with the whole thing. Anyway, that's a great way to phrase it. Mock sexual reproduction. Use that at a bar. Anyway, the penis surrounds the urethra, filled with that erectile tissue, the corpus cavernosum. That's singular, and then cavernosa is plural. At the tip of the penis, for those that still have one, is the foreskin, or the scientific anatomy terminology, the prepuce. The prepuce is a bit of skin tissue that covers the head of the penis, or the glands of the penis. The head is the glands, the proper anatomical terminology, and essentially it secretes oils in order to sort of keep the tissue soft, and has a somewhat lubricating effect during copulation. And then it is also it also is full of sensory structures. If you go online, you can find people whining about having their foreskin removed. They spend a lot of time. I have been online way too much, but you find people fretting over the fact that they no longer have foreskin, which is weird. They're like, I cannot enjoy sex anymore because it could have been greater. And it's sort of like, if you've never experienced what it could have been, then what it could have been means nothing. Stop whining. Stop whining. Good old Arnold Schwarzenegger in there. Okay, so glands of the head, or glands of the penis is the first part that penetrates. Yeah, it's got an interesting shape to it. Sort of that bit where it has, I promised I'd draw a penis. So it has these raised edges on there. It is thought that during the copulatory act, the raised edges can drag out competitor sperm and also seal up against the vaginal walls to drive sperm forward. So it has sort of a sealing effect, and during reproduction, competitor sperm that might be present gets ejected, removed through penis action, and then it sort of seals into the vaginal canal, and your own sperm only have one direction to go. So has an odd little shape that is thought to help with competition for paternity and to help direct sperm during ejaculation. So fascinating stuff. Semen itself is what is ejaculated. Woo! Fun times with anatomy. It has a fluid portion, so the whole thing is fluid. Ejaculate refers not just to sperm, but fluid. It's the product of 3 different glands, which is pretty cool. It is not just a lubricating fluid. It is quite important. It nourishes sperm, provides them with proteins and glucose to power the sperm. They spend a lot of energy wiggling that tail. It provides a medium for movement and lubrication, and the vaginal canal has an acidic pH that can kill sperm. So the semen has a slightly basic pH and protects the sperm while it's in the vaginal canal. Then there is the cellular portion, around 300 million sperm. So lots of sperms. Okay, so let's talk about that fluid portion. It is primarily secreted by 2 glands. One large gland and a pair of smaller glands. So the smaller glands are the seminal vesicles. They are near the origin of the urethra. So if you look right here, this is, let's try and point a little better. This right here is considered the origin of the urethra. Your seminal vesicles are just a little further back right there. And they are responsible for secreting a fair amount of portion of the fluid in the ejaculate. The prostate is also an organ that secretes fluid for the ejaculate. It is essentially just below the seminal vesicles, so right here. And basically when sperm travel through the vas and hit the seminal vesicle, they get some fluid, and then as they travel through the prostate, they get some fluid. It is a single larger gland there, and it is located right underneath the bladder, right by the seminal vesicles. The vas flows right through the middle of the prostate, and the prostate helps secrete fluid portions of ejaculate into the vas and essentially the urethra. All right, The next seminal fluid gland doesn't generally produce ejaculate fluid. It does produce a fluid called pre-ejaculate, which is kind of cool. So they are the Cowper's glands or the bulbourethral glands. They're a little paired set of glands that are extremely small, located right up against the base of the penis, meaning they secrete into the urethra, not the vas deferens. So they're right up against the base of the penis. During stimulation of the penis, it will secrete a fluid, not ejaculate, but pre-ejaculate. And the pre-ejaculate is thought to rinse the urethra in preparation for ejaculation. Basically, it rinses and lubricates the portion of the urethra traveling through the penis, because an erect penis compresses the urethra a bit. And so by lubricating it and rinsing it, you get it cleaned and you get it prepped for sperm transfer. So that powerful ejaculation. So ejaculation. Ejaculation describes a massive muscular systemic function that occurs throughout the body. So the cremasters that can raise and lower the testes also surround the testes and the epididymis and do rhythmic, strong contractions. So extremely strong, extremely rhythmic contractions that are responsible for propelling sperm through the vas deferens at speed. So it starts with the cremasters. Okay. My pen is suddenly not working because, of course, it's not. And from there, we enter the body cavity, and at the body cavity, you have a variety of muscles causing the ejaculation process to continue. So, muscles of the body cavity, especially what we call the pelvic floor. Okay, so there's two big muscles involved here, the bulbospongiosus and the ischiocavernosus. They are present in both male and female reproductive anatomy. The penis just appears to be a very weird clitoris, so that's not particularly surprising that you're going to have common muscles. You will see that the bulbospongiosus and the ischiocavernosus along the penis can do strong contractile muscle actions to push ejaculate through. And then you have them in two different locations in the female body, basically allowing for sort of different pelvic floor contractions during reproduction. So if you're capable of contracting the muscles around the vaginal canal, that's generally bulbospongiosis. Circled the wrong thing right there. So bulbospongiosis and then the ischiocavernosus. Do you have to know these names for the exam? No. But they are part of the massive rhythmic contraction there. We're going to skip out on spermatogenesis because I literally just mentioned that at the onset of puberty, you make 300 million a day and it continues through death. This is meiosis. Real quick, sperm structure, continuing at our breakneck speed, we have the acrosome, which is the tip of the sperm, a cap on it right there. It has a jelly-like consistency and it has digestive enzymes. When you look at an egg, there's the nucleus, there's the membrane of the egg, and then the egg has this jelly layer surrounding it. And a sperm has to digest its way through the jelly layer in order to actually reach the membrane and fertilize the egg. So the acrosome is that cap with digestive enzymes. That's whole deal is to attack the jelly of the egg. Head of the sperm, which basically its whole thing is it contains a small haploid nucleus. The mid piece of the sperm just has loads of mitochondria for making our adenosine triphosphate, because we need crap loads of adenosine triphosphate in order to operate the tail of the sperm, which is essentially one extremely large flagellum that is going to turn like a propeller. So that is a sperm. So we start off the hormonal pathway regarding the male reproductive system with the hypothalamus, with gonadotropin releasing hormone, the releasing hormone. FSH and LH are secreted at the pituitary. This continues essentially from, you get a spike of FSH and LH at the onset of puberty, and this is going to cause the testosterone levels to go up, and you are going to go through puberty. FSH, as we mentioned, involved in spermatogenesis, stimulates the maturation of sperm. LH stimulates secretion of testosterone. Testosterone is involved in sexual differentiation. And yay, we did that already. So, okay, female reproductive anatomy. We start with the ovaries, which are, of course, the gonad, term for the primary sexual reproductive structure. It is located in the pelvic cavity, just below the bladder. So pretty deep down in the pelvic cavity, and it produces the eggs. Specifically, it produces the follicles that produce the eggs. A follicle consists of an egg, some accessory cells, and a fluid environment. So when you look inside of an ovary, right, what you see are follicles. Tons of little follicles. And you have a follicle maturation process, which we already talked about briefly. So that's a nice drawing. Oogenesis is the term for production of eggs. It is pretty darn cool. So essentially, oogenesis is meiosis, and it begins during fetal development. During fetal development, these cells that will become eggs, the progenitor cells, go through meiosis to prophase 1. Meiosis is prophase 1, metaphase 1, anaphase 1, telophase 1, and at the end of it, you get 2 little cells that are haploid. And then the second part of meiosis is prophase 2, metaphase 2, anaphase 2, and telophase 2, causing these 2 cells to each divide, and you get 4 cells. This is meiosis. During egg production, when you finally hit the end of it, you only have 1 cell selected. All the 3 others sort of break down, which is kind of funky. So oogenesis essentially starts during fetal development and stops at prophase 1. Then after the onset of puberty and roughly every month after that, a follicle will be stimulated by FSH, causing meiosis to continue. And we go from prophase 1 to, so here fetal. Then we go to here. This is what FSH stimulates us to go through, to metaphase 2. At metaphase 2, we have ovulation. And ovulation itself basically triggers anaphase 2. And then, so ovulation triggers it to go through anaphase 2, and then telophase 2, right here, does not fully trigger until fertilization. So that's pretty complicated structure right there, and it's very cool. So fertilization is what stimulates the finishing of meiosis. So when you actually look inside an egg, the nucleus is really what's, the DNA in the nuclear area is really what's going through this. You don't get full-on cytokinesis separating the eggs out. So you get cytokinesis in the follicle. So that FSH thing gets cytokinesis, and then one of them dies. And then in that other one at fertilization, you get a nucleus dividing, and then one of them dies. So that's kind of cool. Okay, so this occurs monthly until menopause. Complicated diagram, helpful if you want to look at it. It's in your downloads. Then we have ovulation. Ovulation occurs when we have that luteinizing hormone spike. So, boom, LH, and then you have ovulation. This is when the follicle ruptures. Some people can even feel a follicle rupturing because it migrates to the edge of the ovary and ruptures there, opening a small bit of the membrane of the ovary, which is pretty nuts right there. Ovulation is a violent act. So following rupture of the follicle breaks down into this corpus luteum that we mentioned, and we already know that it secretes progesterone. So once the egg hits the oviducts, or the fallopian tubes, these are our connection to the uterus. So from the ovary to the uterus, the oviduct is actually the site of fertilization. This is why people talk about how you do not know if you are pregnant for some time, because during fertilization and a fair amount of fetal development, you just have the progesterone that you get during a period powering the development of the initial developmental stages of the embryo. And it is not until implantation, and even then sometime after implantation, that you can detect pregnancy hormones. So you generally don't detect pregnancy until a fair ways in, until post-implantation and placental development. And that's because it starts in the oviduct, facilitated by just the normal hormones during the monthly cycle. Okay, so the uterus, if you want a prefix for uterus, METR. So, for instance, the endometrium is the thickening tissue layer of the uterus. So, during fetal development, you have implantation into the uterus, and where we essentially go from embryo to fetus. So it requires a placenta. The placenta being a big hunk of tissue. I'm trying to go fast. The uterus is a big honkin' do you even lift bro muscular structure, right? And that's because it has to contract during labor to expel like a nearly watermelon-sized fetus out of the uterus. So it has a lot of muscle. So we keep talking about implantation of a fetus. That is because there's an internal tissue lining called the endometrium. This is a highly vascular tissue, produces a lot of blood vessels. So if you have the wall of the uterus right there, then you have an endometrium. And I'm just going to sort of draw it building up. So you have initially a small layer, and then it builds up in thickness. And it also, gets blood vessels infiltrating it as it builds up. So the thicker it gets, the more blood vessels it has in it. And these blood vessels are going to be responsible for providing nutrients for the development of a placenta, and then doing all the oxygen exchange for the placenta. So tons of blood vessels in that uterine lining. It thickens, and then it gets sloughed off if implantation does not occur. So if there is not implantation of an embryo and growth of a placenta, then the lining sloughs. And this is what's known as menstruation, or the shedding time or bleeding portion of a period. So not too terrible. So the menstrual cycle can be thought of as a cycle of thickening of the endometrium, development of blood vessels, and then shedding of the endometrium. So endometrial shedding is triggered by estrogen going up when progesterone drops off. I have a cool picture that is very neat that explains that. So cervix is the endpoint of the uterus. It is a very muscular opening that is responsible for closing tightly during pregnancy and dilating very wide during childbirth. So the lower end of the uterus connects up directly to a vaginal canal. So the vaginal canal is the structure that connects the reproductive system to the outside environment at the vulva. Okay, so if you've ever gotten a pap smear, the cervix is what they scrape against to do that. Okay, so the vagina is a long muscular structure. So it has, when you look closely at it, little folds in it. This allows it to get wider, so it can extend in width, and it can even extend in length. So vaginas are an extremely flexible structure. So it has these folds called rugae, which is a general term for folded structures in an organ. Generally termed the birth canal, I dislike that terminology. It is a vagina. It happens to function during birth, but what are you going to do? The vaginal canal connects the cervix to the vulva, muscular. It has a glandular function. It secretes an acidic fluid that inhibits cellular growth and also provides a lubricating function, which that fluid increases during stimulation, so mental or physical. Rugae are those folds or ridges, allows expansion during arousal or childbirth. Boom. The vulva is the external structures of the reproductive system. So it involves several cool things. We have the labia majora, which are generally thick outer tissue folds of the vulva. So if you have ever referred to this portion of female anatomy as a vagina, congratulations, you are officially extremely wrong. The labia majora are the thick outer folds, generally an external fold that covers a lot of the structures, thought to help provide some protection from the external environment. So, external fold, generally protection. Limits stimulation so that general friction with the environment doesn't directly affect things like the clitoris. Then you have another set of folds, the labia minora. They are a secondary fold closer to the openings contained within the vulva. So the labia minora, secondary fold here. Labia minora also extend around the clitoris, helping to form the clitoral hood. Right? So that is sort of an extension of the labia minora. Again, protection. And to a certain degree, prevention of drying out. So the term for that would be desiccation. So they prevent desiccation, cover openings. There are two big openings located by the vulva, one reproductive, one not. So the smaller opening is the urethral opening. So rather than one shared tube like the male reproductive system, the urethra opens directly to the external environment, and that is responsible for urination, amazingly enough. And then we have the vaginal opening right here in the vulva. Well, purple seemed like a bad color there. Okay, so that is the vaginal opening. This is the vulva and the female reproductive system, containing both the urinary system opening and the completely separate vaginal opening. Now, the external clitoris is also located here. So the external clitoris. The external clitoris is a bit different from the clitoris proper. So the external clitoris has the clitoral glands, and the clitoral glands is made of erectile tissue, just like the kind of erectile tissue in the corpus cavernosum of the penis. So erectile tissue that can become engorged with blood. Obviously, there's not too much to a clitoris, so there's no flaccid or erect clitoris, or at least no visibly flaccid or erect clitoris. One, I suppose, could say it's analogous. When a clitoris enlarges with blood, it could be considered erect in its own way. So I guess lady boners is a thing. So, bringing us to a very cool slide showing how the penis is just kind of a weird clitoris. This is the entire clitoris. So when you look at a clitoris, or refer to a clitoris, you are almost referring to the external clitoris. But when you look at the whole clitoris, it nestles up against the pubic bone, and it has this long structure here, then muscular structure along with the internal corpus cavernosum, the erectile tissue, just like the erectile tissue of the penis. You can even see there's a little bit of a fold right there, a groove where the urethra is found in a penis. And then it has these cura that sort of surround the vaginal canal and help anchor it. So clitoral stimulation actually affects quite a bit of female anatomy, both external and internal stimulation. Then when you look at the penis, you have those same little attachment things right there. You have a fair amount of internal structure to the penis. So this is all pretty much internal structure up against the pelvis. And then you have the external penis there. So a penis is literally a modified clitoris. I say a modified clitoris because if you don't have a big flush of testosterone during fetal development, you develop biologically female. You need some hormonal intervention to develop a penis. No hormonal intervention and you develop a clitoris. So a penis is a really weird clitoris. Okay, so this is a really important slide here. This one is directly on the final. Okay, so boom. It is a synthesis of endocrine system and reproductive system of hormones, both FSH, LH, and estrogen and progesterone, and the uterine lining and the follicles. So we have our releasing hormone controlling the whole thing. So releasing hormone, GnRH, essentially starts at puberty. GnRH controls the release of both FSH and LH. Generally, when you look at FSH secretion, you have a pretty level homeostasis point here. And then you have a boost of FSH there. That boost of FSH, that is responsible for getting us maturation of a follicle. So here's where our follicle matures with that bump of FSH. Really, I squared up too much. So that bump of FSH is responsible from going from an immature follicle to a mature follicle. And then you have a spike of luteinizing hormone right here. And that is going to trigger ovulation. Luteinizing hormone triggers ovulation, the rupturing of the follicle. So FSH matures the follicle, helps develop it. LH responsible for ovulation. Okay, let's synthesize this with estrogen production. All right, so FSH helps stimulate estrogen production. So FSH, as it goes up, it bumps right here, and we bump up estrogen, right? At ovulation, estrogen is at its peak. And then shortly after ovulation, progesterone starts to increase. And the reason progesterone increases is because we have the development of the corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum cranks out progesterone, and that causes an estrogen crash. And we keep estrogen low and steady. And then as progesterone falls off, estrogen will go back up. So there. So we have connected FSH and LH to follicular development and ovulation. And we've connected FSH to estrogen levels, and estrogen levels crashing after luteinizing hormone and ovulation because the corpus luteum is produced, and that causes our estrogen levels to go down, progesterone levels go up. So when progesterone crashes here, we're going to start here with a progesterone crash. And when progesterone crashes and estrogen starts to recover, we trigger menstruation. So menstruation goes down, or menstruation is caused by progesterone dropping, and we have a shedding of the endometrial lining, at which point our estrogen levels pick back up and our endometrial lining thickens, right? So there we go. Our endometrial lining thickens, and then ovulation occurs, and progesterone levels are increased, and they maintain the endometrial lining's thickness. So now we have connected follicles, eggs, corpus luteum, the luteinizing hormone, the FSH, the estrogen, the progesterone, menstruation, the uterine lining, all of it in one extremely cool graph that is extremely on your final. So very important. A lot of this stuff is on the final, which I think is very cool. So progesterone, by the way, inhibits FSH and LH, which is why there's this crash afterwards here, which is pretty cool. Okay, so menstrual cycle. We have literally said everything about that, so we'll just skip this bullet and talk about menopause. So menopause is when people say you stop menstruating. It's also when people say you run out of eggs. Menopause is technically neither of those things. Those things are a response to exhausting follicles. Menopause is when you no longer have functional follicles. All functional follicles have been exhausted. And the reason we get technical on this is because the follicles themselves are doing most of our estrogen production. And the corpus luteum that comes after ovulation, that is derived from the follicle, that's doing our progesterone production. So exhausting your follicles isn't just running out of eggs. It isn't just no longer menstruating. It's actually a systemic hormonal effect. Your estrogen levels go down, your progesterone levels go down. Now, estrogen inhibits testosterone. So in addition, your testosterone levels go up. No longer having high levels of estrogen means that your endometrial lining no longer increases. No longer having a corpus luteum means that you no longer maintain thickened endometrial lining, and you no longer have a crash of thickened endometrial lining after progesterone crashes, resulting in menses. So there you go. And that is the limit of this little lecture. I honestly have no idea if this ran pretty long because, unfortunately, this thing crashed a bunch of times, and this duration I'm seeing on my screen includes just continued recording through that, and that's going to get a bunch of cuts. So if this ran long, I know it ran longer than 20 to 30. So I am sorry. Literally, there's a question for almost everything I just said on the final. So... and if you actually take notes on this, I will give you, I don't know, let's say 30 points of extra credit. Yeah, if you stayed this long, you now know that you can get a load of extra credit for taking good notes on this, which means not only copying bullet points, but also copying down things I say. Okay, so that's the end of that. Fun facts. During embryonic development, it's really hard to tell a human fetus apart from like a fish or a horse or a dolphin. In fact, During embryonic development, you get gill slits. The gill slits and a tail develop. The gill slits actually are going to be, they don't develop into like functional gills. You don't breathe using gills during embryonic development. They're actually slits. So you get like this weird peanut-shaped embryo, and then you have these little slits along here. They're not a full-on respiratory system. Rather, they have little bones associated with them. And these little bones right there, they actually fuse together and become the jawbone. So that's fun facts. So you do have the development of gill slits that turn into jaws. These become both jaws and respiratory structures in things like bony fish, which is pretty cool. They stay respiratory structures in things like tadpoles that basically don't really have jaws. They have very rudimentary jaws. Pretty cool. So the bony structures that support your gill slits literally become jaws. Okay, so apologies, but hey, you stay this long, you get 30 points of extra credit if you write these notes. Also, if you stayed this long, literally their answers to questions worth a fair amount of points directly out of this thing. And I really love this subject. So this concludes Biology After Dark. I had a ton of technical difficulties during all of this. I want to tear my Microsoft Surface tablet to pieces. I would like to smash it against rocks. But worth it, because there's nothing I like better than socially acceptable ways of talking to younger people about penises and vaginas. So, best of luck on your final, and best of luck in your lives, should I never see you again.